Hey guys, welcome back. So this video, I'm going to talk about engine break-in. The reason being is not only have a few people have asked, this seems to be a reoccurring topic. Not just as I come across people in person, conversations come up, but also online. I see it in every space you can imagine. Every social media post, every forum, every article, you name it. In some way, shape, or form, since the beginning of time, since ICE engines have been around, these internal combustion engines, there has always been a topic of discussion with break-in. How to break it in, how to drive it, how not to drive it. What do you do for a certain amount of miles? How many miles do you go for? How do you drive it? It's just endless and endless. And there's some good information out there, and then there's some bad information mixed in. And for many people, when you see all types of information, it might actually freak you out and make you think, damn, I don't want to do anything. Or I'm just going to drive it easy and just avoid anything crazy until, I reach my 1,000-mile mark, just for example. I don't blame you. It's overwhelming. So a little bit about me and why I'm talking about this. I've been in the industry in different engineering test groups. I've been in different bubbles with research and development for manufacturers and helped develop vehicles and car components, whether it's mechanical or electrical or even software. So over the past 10 years, I've been exposed to a lot of different things. I've worked with many different teams, engineers and technicians alike, and what I've learned, there are certain processes when it comes to science and math that are tried and true. It's you input your data, it outputs a certain outcome, it'll happen the same every single time. I'm going to cover two major topics that are consistent in every space. It doesn't matter if you're a fabricator or an engine builder or an engineer or a physicist. These two things have been tried and true when it comes to ICE engines. So I'm going to start with the first one. Metal does not like to expand or contract rapidly. What does that mean? Have you ever seen that person get into his car, start up at a cold start, jump into first gear, take it to red line, and just beat the living hell out of it from the get-go? I'm sure you've seen or at least met one person like that. And honestly, it's very cringy for me to see that. Now, another question. Have you seen that one car, truck, motorcycle that's been cruising on the highway that's just puffing out blue smoke? For those of you who don't know what it is, some of you already know. Blue smoke means what? You're consuming oil. You're burning it, right? So what does that mean? Well, this is what it really comes down to. A lot of the times, blue smoke can be coming from a few different areas, but the primary area would be, what we're going to touch now, is your piston rings. Piston rings, oil coming through, and it's passing through at operating temperature, and it's burning it off. And it should not be doing that because the whole point of a piston ring is to seat up against the cylinder wall to create a seal with your oil as it goes, the piston goes up and down the cylinder, creating that compression. Now what happens when your piston rings are out of whack? They warp because when you go from cold to hot really fast, they can expand and tweak and contort, and they won't warm up in the way that they need to. They'll actually not keep the shape as it was intended for during operating temperature. So what happens there is that it no longer creates that seal that it was meant to. And yes, you're having oil pass through. You can also have fuel pass through into your oil. So that pollutes that as well, contaminates it. But also, you can lose power because you're losing compression. So one, you're burning off oil. Two, it probably is contaminating from the fuel and all the other stuff that's being combusted in your engine. And three, there's power loss because you're not holding compression anymore. What's the fix to that? Unfortunately, it's an expensive teardown. You have to take that engine apart and replace it. replace those components at the very least. Now, the damage can also be caused to the cylinder walls, meaning scoring or other damage, creating grooves into the walls, meaning you're probably going to have to rebuild the block, re-hone that out. If it's not even savable, you have to get a whole other block. And that sucks even more because that's a really, really costly route you want to take. So, why am I telling you this? There's an easy solution around that. What I did with this car, because I got it with less than 20 miles from the dealership, when I first went for a drive to go ahead and start during my break-in miles, during the first few hundred miles, I actually generally do this anyway, but more specifically, during this break-in period, I let the car warm up fully. I let it warm up to full operating temperatures. What does that mean? So coolant temperatures, I let go up to 210, 212 degrees. That's where it's fully at operating temperature. And then for the oil, I let it reach at least 180 degrees. That's a round number because at that point, you know that everything in your engine is pretty much warmed up when you've reached 180 degrees of oil temperatures. Also, if for whatever reason you do have moisture that's trapped in your oil, because oil does trap things like contaminants and moisture and things like that to protect from your engine, at that point it actually burns it off. Because you're reaching such high temperatures, it has to go somewhere. So that's my rule of thumb. Before I drove this, I reached basically fully operating temperatures. I actually surpassed 180 degrees of oil temp. I was at the coolant temp that I wanted to be, above 210. And then I drove a quick drive over to a mountain road. And then the second thing I wanted to mention is what I did. Now, you can let your car fully warm up, but if you buy it and just cruise down the highway at a steady RPM, that's actually not doing you any favors. I'm going to tell you why. You actually need RPM sweep. Now, I talked about engine break-in components need to warm up. Well, as important as that is, your piston rings are still seating to your cylinder walls during that time. So it actually needs to sweep up in RPM and down in RPM. So in a traffic setting, yes, that could work. If you're in stop and go, right? But not every scenario is consistent, and we can't control those circumstances all the time because we're just at the mercy of everyone around us. So why I chose a mountain road is because I can choose how to RPM sweep. I can accelerate, I can decelerate, and I can keep it in a range that I can control at the speed that I want to control it at. And with that said, during those break-in periods and break-in miles, that is actually helping your rings seat properly into your piston rings. Cylinder walls, sorry. Piston rings to your cylinder walls. Now, there's a couple things I want to mention because I also mentioned some engineering teams that I've seen do R&D on components like engines and such. I'm going to use a totally different reference. I've done some research and I've seen specifically motorcycle race teams actually build engines, and they did a comparison. I saw this article where they compared two different engines. Well, I should say they had a variety of engines, but they had two main ones. They had one setting where, okay, we're going to do hard break-in, and we're just going to send it. And then on the other bike, we're kind of going to do the same thing, but there's one factor that changed. Warm-up. So, fresh engine, freshly put together. It's a race engine. It's on a super sport chassis. They were ready to take this on the track. This is where they had a controlled setting on the racetrack, and they actually broke it in, but they broke it in hard. Now, they can control how they sweep through the RPMs. Obviously, motorcycles spin at such insane RPMs. They're surpassing 16,000 RPMs a lot of times. Some even go up to 20,000 RPMs. Like, it's really high. Now, sounds insane, but what did they do with one engine on one bike? They let it warm up fully. It reached full operating temperatures, both coolant and oil, before they sent it out on the track. and then they went out, did a lap, make sure everything else is warmed up, because you have to warm up your tires because they're on slicks and so on and so forth to get up to operating temperatures, and then they sent it. But they did it in such a way that they were constantly sweeping the RPM. They weren't cruising at 1, they weren't holding it at red line, they were sweeping throughout the entirety of the RPM, but they weren't babying it, they were driving it pretty hard. And then the other bike, they didn't do the warm-up process and they just sent it. Now, a lot of aftermarket companies, not all, but a lot, will actually, like billet forged pieces and with other exotic metals, when they put it together, they actually go through a heat cycle process. So they expose it to certain heat thresholds that your engines are likely to go through on a regular basis, specifically for racing, so higher temps, obviously, and higher stress loads. So they actually expose it to the heat. What does that do? When they go through these cycles, it actually exposes that component to that as if you were breaking it in. So when they assemble these race engines with these components, they've already been exposed to these heat thresholds. So when they go ahead and send it, when it's at operating temperatures, it's technically already good to go. The only thing that isn't, and it doesn't matter what the material is and how it's designed, your piston rings still need to seat up against the cylinder walls because they're constantly sweeping up and down. That's the only thing we can't get away from. So other manufacturers, like Honda, to switch gears a little bit, this is a very world-known manufacturer, right? On their everyday commuter car, let's just choose the K-Series block, the 2.0. Let's just start with the 2.0, K20. They actually take their block, short block, attach it to an electric motor, and they run it to allow RPM sweep, piston rings seating to the cylinder block, just bare as it is, allowing, well, obviously not the top half of the engine is what I mean, bare as it is, but they're just running it through. Obviously there's oil there, but they're just making sure that you're getting that embedding process done. They try to do as much as they can during factory before they pre-assemble and send it out to you as the consumer takes it. So basically, as a consumer, you have to break it in as very little as possible because the manufacturer did most of it for you. So if manufacturers are taking those extra steps to make sure that your engines are, I would say, kind of mostly broken in, I could only imagine the components that they put in there that are ready to go if they're allowing the everyday consumer to just get it and go, which is what most people do. Now, outside of those two things, outside of just letting it warm up to your fully operating temperature and then doing RPM sweep, there's also rumors about why not take it past 4,000 RPM or a certain number RPM depending on how high it revs, right? There's a cap usually somewhere. Don't go past this number. Don't drive it hard. Well, there's been builders, there's been race teams, there's been auto manufacturers that have been able to successfully put engines together and have been successfully proven in extreme circumstances, whether it's in a road course scenario or race team or what have you, and they've gone through the stresses and abuse and extremes. And this is what they go through during R&D. So during this R&D process, they already go through all scenarios that they would imagine their consumer to go through. So chances are your engine can handle it. Whether you go past 4,000 RPMs or not, chances are you're going to be fine. Probably not going to have an issue. I actually drove my car that way. I did a full RPM sweep, and I didn't shy away from going to redline, because I understood that this boxer engine, let's just add a fun fact here, Subaru has actually gotten a worldwide award for having the longest ownership of their cars to last the longest, because their owners tend to buy their cars and just drive them. Now, they obviously make sport utility vehicles of different variations. So they do go through different strenuous activities, but off and on roads. And the majority of these owners are still driving them. All they do is simple maintenance. Now, if they have this recognition, they must be doing something right. So I'm not too worried about that. But I'm not telling you to go out and drive it hard. I'm just saying if you're not comfortable with that, just abide by those two things. Let it warm up fully and RPM sweep. If you at least do those two things, you will do just fine and you won't have any issues. Anything else outside of that, if you want, go for it. Even though it says in the owner's manual or there's other restrictions telling you don't do this, honestly, they're just trying to cover their ass. They just want to make sure that they don't have any lawsuits. Can you imagine if millions of people read in a book saying that you can drive it however you want? That means they have to cover that warranty coverage during that time frame. They don't want that on their heads. They don't want to get sued. That's just a huge lawsuit waiting to happen. So that's why they put those things and contingencies in those books, so that you don't most likely bring them a beat to hell car ran into the ground. That's just a precaution. But obviously, every rule that's written in the book, are those always black and white? Usually not always. And that's why there's aftermarket companies trying to find what these things can do and can't do. That's why there's race teams that are pushing these things to the limit, because they're really trying to see how much further they can go and then what can they do on top of that. So simply put, that is very basic, very straightforward way to break in your engine. Now there's so many other variables that you can throw in there. Changing your fluid earlier, using a different type of oil, maybe break-in oil, this and that. Honestly, do it as you please, but is it 100% necessary to get a engine that's broken in properly? Maybe not 100%, but this is what I tell people. Drive the car as you will, as you plan to own the car. If you're going to drive it and commute in it, drive it like that. If you're going to drive it hard, drive it hard. At least let it warm up and at least do the RPM sweep. And then lastly, change your oil at 1,000 miles. The reason people say that is because it's not a shock factor to say, but just so that you're not thrown off guard, there are little bits and pieces of metal shavings that do come off fresh engines. It happens. It's just the way it goes. And that's just because that's just part of it breaking in naturally. So why they ask you to change it at 1,000 miles early is to get rid of that excess junk, because you don't want that excess junk in your engine oil as you continue to drive it as the engine oil breaks down. Because as the engine oil breaks down, it's also trying its best to contain all the other contaminants coming in from your air filter, the fuel, the combustion, all of that. On top of the extra bits and pieces of your engine, it doesn't need that. So that's why people tell you to change your oil at 1,000 miles, just for peace of mind and to make sure that you're good to go. So hopefully that was helpful for you. If you want to give me any comments or feedback as to what you thought about this, please let me know. I'm always open to hearing what you guys have to say. Hopefully this serves you guys some purpose and gives you some peace of mind, because that's all I'm really aiming to do, is just sharing my knowledge for you guys, if that's going to be helpful to you at all. So thank you for watching. See you guys next time.